Quick summary. Behavior chain is a linked sequence of responses leading to a terminal outcome. Terminal outcome meaning the final behavior we want to see. We take one complex behavior like tying shoes or hand washing, and we break them down into small responses, and we teach those small responses until they can complete the entire chain. Each response produces a stimulus chain that functions as a reinforcement for that response, meaning my response produces a change that in turn reinforces the response I just did. And then when we engage in that response, we then produce a stimulus change that signals the SD or signals the next response to occur, thus making it a chain. A task analysis is how we create the chain. Again, we break that complex task into smaller teachable units, which ultimately leads to a behavior chain. So how do we do these things? Well, when we conduct a task analysis, there are 4 methods Cooper lists. 1, you can observe a competent performer, and that's key, okay? If we're teaching a 5-year-old to do something, are we going to observe another 5-year-old? Well, unless that 5-year-old is extremely gifted or extremely talented, it might be better to watch somebody more competent complete that specific task. We want to be sure it's either a person well-trained or who's been doing it a long, long time, typically an adult. You can execute the task yourself. So if you are able to complete whatever chain we're trying to do, if you can't ride a bike, then obviously you're not going to execute the task yourself of riding the bike. But if you can, that's perfectly acceptable. You can ask an expert. So if you're trying to teach somebody to cook, asking Gordon Ramsay would be a great way to conduct a task analysis. And then trial and error. So you can do it the hard way, right? Where we construct this task chain, and through trial and error, we figure out what is the best way to teach these steps. What are the best steps? All 4 of these are perfectly acceptable, and you need to know them, especially for your exam. Now, how do we assess mastery? Because once we have our task analysis, we've conducted our task chain, we're going to want to figure out, well, how much of the chain can this person actually do? Because that might actually affect what kind of chain we choose. We can use a single opportunity method where we will probe the behavior. And if that behavior is only completed, let's say to step 6, well, we're going to terminate the probe once the client can no longer complete any more steps. Another way to say it, if we have 10 steps and we're going to probe this chain and the client can't produce or can engage in any response after step 5, well, we're not going to go any further. We're going to stop there. The multiple opportunity method, however, using the same example, we have 10 steps. If step 5 is performed incorrectly, we will complete the step for the learner and move on through the remainder of the steps. So single opportunity is obviously more conservative because we stop at the first sign of trouble, whereas multiple opportunity, we continue moving on. Again, task analysis, we're going to use one of our 4 methods to get this task chain. We're then going to assess the mastery of this task chain, which will then lead us to choose a chaining procedure. First one, most common, especially with neurotypical kids or children without disabilities, is forward chaining. We're teaching behaviors in their naturally occurring order. First step is taught first, and then you can prompt through the rest, or you might just teach each step individually. You might make them do the first step over and over again. Regardless, if you're forward chaining, you're going to teach the first step. And once that first step is achieved, you reinforce. So if we have a 10-step chain, we're teaching step 1 and reinforcing for step 1. Once we hit our criterion for how many times they need to independently complete step 1, we then move on to step 2. Now we're teaching step 1 and 2 and reinforcing after step 2. And you can see how this goes on and on and on. We go from step 1 to step 1 and 2, step 1, 2, 3, continually reinforcing at the end of whatever the last step is we've taught. So we're forward chaining. We're teaching in the naturally occurring order. For example, hand washing. Step 1 is turn water on. That's where we'll start. So if the client performs the step of turn water on, we'll deliver reinforcement. Let's say this happens 4 times. They hit our criterion for completing step 1 independently. So now we're going to have them engage in step 1 and step 2. So let's say step 2 is put soap on hands. Well, now the client has to turn the water on and put soap on their hands before reinforcement is delivered. Let's say it happens 4 more times, and those are just example numbers, but let's say it happens 4 more times. We move on. Now we're going to make them turn water on, put soap on hands, put hands underwater. Step 3. So on and so forth. Forward chaining, behaviors are taught in their naturally occurring order. What about backward chaining? Backward chaining is confusing to many people when you first learn it because it's not intuitive, right? It's not typically how we're teaching something, but it can be very effective, especially when that final step in the backwards chain is a strong reinforcer. So that's essentially what we're doing here. Behaviors are completed in order with prompts. So essentially, the technician or the BCBA or the teacher is helping the client or the student complete the whole chain except for the final behavior in the chain. That final behavior is taught first, and when that final behavior is completed or executed, then reinforcement is delivered. In other words, client is prompted to the chain, reinforcement is delivered when the last behavior in the chain is achieved. And then client is prompted to the chain, reinforcement is then delivered when the last and second to last behavior in the chain are achieved. It's the exact opposite of forward chaining. Think of the last step and escape as a form of reinforcement. So if we are making a sandwich and the last step before you get to eat it is cutting the sandwich in half, well, not only can we praise the client, not only can we let them escape from the task, but now they get to eat the sandwich. So you can see how backward chaining can be very reinforcing when used properly. So let's use our hand washing example for backward chaining. Let's say we have 9 steps. We're going to prompt through steps 1 through 8 and then reinforce for the final step of drying hands. So we want the client or the learner or the student to dry their hands independently. Only then will they get reinforcement plus escape from the task. Again, 4 times is just an example number, but let's say that's our criterion. They do that 4 times. We'll then prompt through steps 1 through 7. And as you guessed, we're going to reinforce for the final step and the second to last step. So now the client has to both turn the water off and dry their hands independently to receive reinforcement. And again, they'll receive escape as well, naturally from the chain or activity. So you can see it's essentially the exact opposite of forward chaining. Total task chaining is when you have let's say, a very skilled learner who knows most of the chain. Maybe you have limited time. Maybe the client already knows most of the chain. Whatever it might be, with total task chaining, we're not teaching forward to back. We're not teaching backward to forward. We're teaching the whole chain. It's a variation of forward chaining, right? Because we're not technically backward chaining. We are teaching in order, but instead of stopping at step 1 or stopping at step 2, we're doing steps 1 through 9 every single time. It's also called total task presentation or whole task presentation. You provide assistance for any steps the learner cannot perform. So if we have steps 1 through 9 for hand washing, we're going to teach steps 1 through 9 every time we wash hands with the client. Now, let's say the client has trouble with steps 2 and 4. Well, you will provide assistance for steps 2 and 4 until the client can complete them independently, but you will still teach every single step in the chain. Obviously, total task chaining is often quicker. It's often used when you, again, already know most of the steps, or you have a very skilled learner. You're teaching every single step and having them complete the chain themselves every single time, and only providing assistance for steps they don't know. Now, a behavior chain interruption strategy is an invaluable tool for when we're using behavior chains, because the problem with behavior chains, especially if you're working with, say, the population, the autism population, is they become very rote and they become almost memorized. Now, consider generalization. If I teach a chain over and over again at my house, and I never interrupt it, I never throw any different variables in there, I never change the environment, what is it going to be like when we go out in public? And the environment is always changing and it's unpredictable. It's going to be a lot harder to complete that chain given we've never practiced that. So with the behavior chain interruption strategy, that's the entire idea. You have the client perform critical elements of a chain, but you interrupt it intermittently. Okay, you want to see the client emit a new behavior. You're forcing them to adapt to changes in their environment. It's going to help with generalization. It's going to help with maintenance. So for instance, hand washing. Let's say the client successfully washes their hands, but then you block access to a towel. So let's draw it all together. Let's say we were using backwards chaining and grabbing the towel was the last step, right? Wiping their hands. And the towel has always been on the sink, easily accessible. Well, today they go through the whole chain, but you block access to the towel or you place it inside a cabinet. You've now forced the client or the learner to either verbally make a request for the towel or go inside the cabinet and look for a towel. Okay, we're changing this chain. Every chain we do in life, right, is for the most part affected by how that environment is that day, right? Things as simple as making breakfast can be affected by things like you waking up early. Maybe you're out of milk. Okay, maybe you leave the eggs on too long. Whatever it is, right? We have to adapt. And that is the idea behind a behavior chain interruption strategy. So in this situation, you're either going to prompt the client to ask for, or they're going to get a towel themselves. We want to teach these novel behaviors, but in a more natural way. So how do we choose a chaining method? There's a lot of debate. There's a lot of different opinions out there. According to Cooper et al., research does not really indicate a clear winner. So this is a good time to follow our task list and our ethical code, right? We need to consider several things. First, you should always do an assessment. What's going to work for the client? You need to consider client preferences, consider stakeholder preferences, consider resources, consider the client's skills, right? If you've got a very low-skilled client who functions well with negative reinforcement, so escape behavior, maybe use backward chaining. If you have a high-skilled client who learns very quickly, well, maybe not waste your time with forward or backward and just jump right into total task. So you need to be a good behavior analyst and figure these things out yourself. And then consider client behavior. If your client has difficulty starting, or they, again, are reinforced by escape, well, maybe use backwards chaining. If they have trouble completing a whole task chain in one go, maybe use forward chaining to build up momentum. This is all going to be based on your assessment. All right. Research, again, does not indicate a clear winner. It needs to be client specific. Okay, that's task chaining, task analysis. Very straightforward, in all honesty, right? Let's not get too complicated here, okay? Because it's not. As always, check out bcbastudy.com for our BCBA materials, rbtexamreview.com for our RBT materials.